Hi, my name is Abeng and I'm the co-founder of Grassroots for Good. Grassroots for Good is a non-profit where we increase the earning power of African youth by empowering them with the tech skills that they need to get connected to the next role, job, opportunity, or even build the startup that's going to change Africa. So far, we've been able to do this, and we've trained over 200,000 people in our community. We've trained over 100,000 people actually, and then we've built a community of over 200,000 people. And this is really interesting to watch. I guess everybody in some way or one way or the other have felt the impact of Grassroots for Good. But today is not about Grassroots for Good. Whenever I start talking about Grassroots for Good, I get so excited. I remember receiving this email from the organizers of the event, the FAIL conference, saying that I should give the second keynote speech. I was so warmed up and I felt so honored that I was considered for this. I feel and consider myself a PhD expert in failure because I have failed a lot, and I think every single one of us have experienced different kinds of failure. So just understanding that failure is something that should be a badge of honor is such an important thing to know. And that's how I wear my failure. I've learned to wear my failure as a badge of honor because behind every failure is a success. And today, my keynote, which is going to be about learning from failure and pivoting your ideas, I will be talking to you about 4 keywords, actually 3 keywords and 4 stories. Yes, 3 keywords, 4 stories. So pay attention to these words, and I hope they help you as you figure out how to learn from failure and pivot your ideas. Every failure comes with a lesson, and that's really why I wear my own failure as a badge of honor, because everything you learn leads you up to the next thing. And it doesn't make sense when it's happening, but it makes sense when you look back. You look back and you realize, oh my God, now everything makes sense. So what are the 3 words that I'm going to be talking to you about today? Doing. Let's start there. The first word is doing, or maybe let's say do. Action word, do. I'm going to make sure everything is an action word, right? So number 1, do. What's the story there? It starts with me remembering a speech I came across by Shonda Rhimes, and it was a comparison between a dreamer and a doer. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, or if you know someone or have 2 people in your life where one person is an absolute dreamer and the other person is an absolute doer. This is not to say that there are not people who are dreamers and doers, right? But just flow with me. Again, I didn't write this, but Shonda did. But it was about, people dreaming and comparing someone who just spends a lot of their time just dreaming but not doing, and then this other person who is doing every single day in tiny little fractions, tiny little bits, showing up in little amounts, no matter how little, but just ensuring that they show up every single day. When you compare the progress after a year, 2, or even 3 years between the person who has spent 3 years dreaming versus the person who has spent 3 years doing, you would find that the person who has spent 3 years doing has gotten compounded efforts, compounded results, compounded solutions, because by doing, they have shown up, they've made mistakes, they've built connections, they've found someone, something has happened somewhere that has altered the direction of their lives. I found this true for myself because I've realized that learning is never complete until you do. Your ability to do every day, show up just a little every single day, is what would really make the difference. And I know this can be really difficult, to be honest, but it takes guts, it takes power, it takes a lot to actually make up your mind to just do. And I heard a lot of people tell me, oh, bless them, but I am not so consistent. I don't know how to be consistent. How do I do? And I'm like, but you do every day. You brush your teeth every day. You bath every day. You do something every day, right? It's just that there are other things that are just difficult for you to do. And that's also my story in doing. During the lockdown, I was wondering, how is it that I am so consistent at brushing my teeth, but then when it comes to some other tasks, it kind of feels like I'm inconsistent doing them? And I realized that it's because of how we view consistency. Why do you brush your teeth every day? And think about the days where you forget to brush your teeth, right? Let's say I woke up this morning, I was in such a hurry. Well, not me, let's say you woke up this morning, you were in such a hurry and you dashed out of your house, and in the cab or in the car or halfway close to this event, you realize, oh my God, I haven't brushed my teeth, but I've eaten already. What do you do tomorrow? Would you be like, oh, because I didn't brush my teeth yesterday, or because I didn't brush my teeth today, I will never brush my teeth again? Would that be your reality? I really hope not. I hope that you would wake up the next morning and say, I missed yesterday, I can't afford to miss today, so I'm going to brush harder than I've ever brushed just because I missed yesterday, right? And that's really how consistency works. That's really how doing works. It's not about only doing until you burn out, but doing until you get to a level where maybe you miss a day, but you're comfortable knowing that you can show up again tomorrow. Doing is really what makes the difference. You create ripple effects, you create so many possibilities by just doing. And do you know what the result of doing is? Progress. Not failure, not success, but progress. And when you see progress, like when you see it as a thing where you're prioritizing progress, you'd realize that the goal was never perfection. The goal was progress, which somehow results into growth. And that changes your mindset. That changes a lot about how you view life. So number one thing starts by doing. If you haven't done, you would not have anything to pivot from. You would not have anything to learn from. You won't have any results to show. You would have nothing. I would rather have something than nothing. So number one, do. Number two, experiment. Now, this one is my personal jam, because I really love the idea of experimenting. And please blame my science background. A lot of you may not know this, but my life started out as a person who wanted to become a medical doctor. I was on course to becoming a neurosurgeon. In fact, that was what I was crazy about. I just wanted to be a neurosurgeon, someone operating on the brains of people to help them get better. I was enamored with the idea of saving lives, right? And that was what I wanted to do. But guess what? Along the lines of my career, I realized, oh my God, this life that I've chosen, is this really what I want to do, you know? And I did. It wasn't that I didn't love medicine. I think that the people who chase after medicine are brave, and they're strong, and they're powerful, and they have hearts. Because what if you lose a patient? Will you be able to deal with it? That was my own thing. Please don't make it your thing. I think you should focus on the lives that you can save and not the ones that you lose. But moving on from that, somehow, somewhere in between, I just didn't end up a medical doctor. And I still had a science background. I still did a lot of experiments, chemistry experiments and things like that. Do you know what I learned from doing experiments? And it only just occurred to me this year that that was something that I learned. That the goal of an experiment is not to be right, but the goal of the experiment is to discover. So you don't go into an experiment expecting, oh my God, everything I do must be right. You don't go into an experiment saying, when I mix this and this, it must give me this. You go into an experiment with an open mind, knowing that when you mix this and this, maybe it should give you this, but if it doesn't, you just discovered something new. And by discovering something new, you might even become an inventor. You might become the person who comes up with the life-changing idea. Let's talk more about experiments. Famous post-it notes. I know you know post-it notes, right? All those yellow, different colors now that you post on, like you paste it on your wall, and you put keywords or goals or interesting things that you don't want to forget. That was a result of an experiment. It happened by mistake. You know, he did something. He was trying to invent a glue that could stick, like a strong glue. But guess what happened? He ended up with a glue that wasn't sticking very well. And that could have been perceived as a failure. I'm sure he even thought himself a failure. But guess what? Someone, I think his friend, went ahead and said, oh wow, this thing, let me use it to stick a couple of things on my hymn book. And it worked out for him. And do you know how that turned out? It turned out being the famous post-it notes and sticky notes that everybody uses today, a multi-million-dollar invention. But if he had just thrown his hat and said, oh my God, this is a failure, it would never have turned out into what it turned out as now that we're celebrating and using it, you know. And it took years for it to make sense. My point is that experiments are not always straightforward. My life as a branding and comms person is a product of an experiment. In fact, a lot of the work that we have done at I4G products of experiments. The beauty about experiments is that it helps you fail very fast and then rediscover new ways to do things. Why I like experiments is because it's about learning, relearning, and unlearning. And that can be difficult to grasp, but it changes your perception about failure. It makes you see failure not as a bad thing, but as a badge of honor, because failures birth new experiences. Now, the second story I'm going to tell you is about Ingressive for Good and how it became a product of an experiment. So back then at Ingressive Capital, there were a lot of different things that they tried because they were trying to add value to the ecosystem, right? Things like founders first, saying, we don't have talent, what can we do? Ingressive Capital went to schools. I think it was called Ingressive Advisory at the time. It was just Ingressive, so not Capital or anything else in front of it. And they went to schools and said, how about we build ambassador communities and introduce them to global tech leaders? And they introduced some founders and some students rather to Figma and very interesting global companies. But that was not enough. We realized, oh wow, students also have so many other problems, like they can't pay their school fees, they don't have laptops, they don't have access to education, tech education and things like that. And so we tried to make different things happen, but we were experimenting and trying different things. We did a whole lot of CSR activities at the time. And then we realized these are the top 3 that are working the most. Let's extract those and make them into a non-profit. And that was really what led to the foundation forming of Ingressive for Good. If we never did those experiments, we would never have probably identified the gaps the way that we did them, and we would never have identified the best way that we can show up for our community. So that was an instrumental part of our lives. If we never experimented, I4G would probably never exist. Another experiment that we did when we first started, nobody gave us money. We didn't have $1 in our accounts, not 1 naira, nothing. It was in the thick of COVID. Everybody was focused on giving health reliefs, giving money for people to figure out, how to solve COVID problems. And that was such a big deal. But education was also important, but we can understand how it would not rank as, one of the most important things, right? And so people were less likely to give money. But on top of that, people were scared. There was so much uncertainty. So people weren't even investing in for-profits, not to think of non-profits. Do you know what we did? We landed and created a pivot, like a pilot program rather. And that pilot program revolved around figuring out what are key things that are working, how can we show proof that this is something that people actually needed. It was an experiment. We didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know anything for sure. And so we tried it, and guess what? It worked out. And it didn't work out exactly how we planned it, but it worked out in a different way that turned out even better. But we would never have found that way if we did not experiment. And that opened up doors to partner with global companies like Facebook, Datacam, big companies, Coursera, and even Alphabet of Google, like Google's Alphabet giving us $250,000. But if we never experimented, none of that would have happened. So embrace experiments. See experiments from a new light, right? Experiments, again, are all about learning, relearning, and unlearning. Embrace the power of experiments. Now, the final thing that we're going to talk about today, which is the third word, is share. The answer to your prayer is probably one person away from you, just like one person. And that's a big deal because my third story, I remember working in an agency and we sat in a room where we were exploring different, like we wanted to run a campaign and we needed to call the names of influencers that we wanted to work on that campaign. And it was a global brand, like it was a big brand known all over the world. It was individuals, 6 of us, deciding who should we include in this campaign. And we were naming people that we knew, people that we remembered, people that had made an impression. Guess what? It wasn't enough to name. You needed to defend the person that you were talking about. Why do you think this person deserves it? Why is this person the best person for the role? Do you think this person can execute? Now, you don't know this person in their personal life. That's number one. The only thing you have as in your arsenal to defend them is their work. Only the work they have shared online. And that's really what's going to make the difference between whether they're going to earn this thousands of dollars or if they're not going to earn it, right? And so we did. We defended people, but some people ranked higher than others just because they had shared better, not because of the number of followers, but just because of the quality of their work. It's not enough to do. It's not enough to experiment. It's also very important to share the results of that work. Share your work. Share what you're doing. Share your challenges. Share how you're going about those challenges. Share, share, share. share, share, share. I remember the story of Tina. She's one of our beneficiaries at I4G, and to be honest, sharing is a big deal at I4G. Everything that we have done so far, every product of our work is heavily tied to sharing. So Tina shared the progress of her work. She got the idea where, you know, I think everybody was watching Real Housewives of Lagos at the time, and she was like, I don't want to argue with my friends about Real Housewives of Lagos when I can use the data that I am learning at Ingressive for Good. So she was learning data analysis with our partner Data Camp as well. And she was like, I would use my data to prove who is the correct person in this argument. And so she went and did a whole sentiment analysis on the conversation around Real Housewives of Lagos. Nobody asked her to do it. And she did it. And she shared it. And she shared her thoughts, her experience, her challenges, everything. She shared it in very cute ways that didn't have to talk about her personal life, but just sharing. And by sharing, guess what? Tina got a laptop. Tina got a job. Tina won dollars on the internet. The internet has made the world a level playing field. Maybe not perfect, but you know, you have better chances. So don't make excuses. You don't have to share your personal life. You can determine what you would share and what you would never share. Just share, because that's the key to you being memorable. That's the key to you being discoverable. That's the key to you being findable. Make it easier for your name to come up in rooms where you're not present in, and make it easier for people to defend you when they recommend you. People will not recommend you if they don't even know what you're good at, or if they don't even know what you do, right? And don't put too much pressure on yourself saying, oh my God, but I'm not that good. No, you're good enough. Don't underestimate what it is that you know and overestimate what it is that other people know. Just share what you're comfortable sharing. If you cannot show up in a video, show up in an audio. If you can't do audio, write. If you can't write, it's okay to even use socks and do puppets sharing, right? Create puppets so you can remain anonymous. As you share, you will recognize communities, you know, and people who you align with, people who give you a sense of belonging, people who you have shared values with. Don't throw those people away. Bring them closer. Make them your community, because the days where you don't feel so great, those people might form your bedrock. They will form the bedrock of your life, really. Keep a win journal as well. As I said, sharing is about documenting, right? So document your wins, because there are going to be days where you would forget how amazing you are, some amazing things that you have accomplished, some things that you've pushed yourself to get done. You're going to forget. And on those days where you forget, it's nice to go back somewhere and look at it and be like, oh my God, I did this, you know, and give yourself a pat on the back. For example, sometimes I forget that I sold a company to Flutterwave. And Flutterwave acquired a company that I was a co-founder of. I forget. And I'm like, oh my God, where's this imposter syndrome coming from? And on those days, I go back to my win journal. I look back at it and be like, I did this. I look back at the, you know, beautiful comments amazing people in my community have left for me. I look back on my community and hope that they can, you know, give me the extra B pillars for me, be support systems for me. So don't take your community for granted. Don't take building connections for granted. Make it a very important and integral part of your life. And when you feel like an imposter, don't forget, go back to your win journal. And beyond that, another great way to shut down imposter syndrome is by doing. For me, I think that a lot of times we feel fear when we want to do, when we want to experiment, and when we want to share. But here's my word for you. Next time, look fear in the eye and wait until it walks away. If you feel fear about anything, that's a sign and an indication to go do it. I recently just bungee jumped all the way from the sky for no good reason, to be honest. And you know, I felt fear, but I did it. And guess what? I didn't die, because I always ask myself, what is the worst that could happen? But I don't stop there. I also ask myself, what's the best that can happen? And that's really how you attack failure. That's really how you look failure in the eye until it changes. Now my fourth story, remember the 3 words: do, experiment, and share. Now my fourth story, which doesn't have a word, but it's my conclusion, right? It's about gaming, which is shocking. I think that we learn a lot about failure and our attitude towards failure, and even learning from failure through games. You don't have control over your obstacles. I don't know how many of you have played Mario, Tetris, anything else. There is always something that represents you, right? You don't have control over everything else that is coming, other attacks. Even if it's Candy Crush, you don't have any control over the candies that are coming. What you have control over is you. You. And that's the only thing you should focus on, right? And guess what? When you fail a level, do you die? No. I mean, of course you die in the game, but you don't personally die. You just figure out, okay, I did it this way, it didn't work, let me try some other way. And you would keep trying different other ways, which is the experiment thing we talked about, until you eventually figure it out. You don't move past the level until you figure out how to beat the obstacles and get to the next level, right? Someone asked me, Blessing, what is the secret behind your win mindset? And I said, it's my failure mindset, because I don't see failure as this is the end of my life thing. You know, I think of failure as, oh, this is a stepping stone to get me to the next level. I use failure as my ladder, and I hope that this inspires you to use failure as your ladder as well. Last thing, back to the gaming story. Over the last couple of weeks, I have been playing a lot of FIFA. I've been relearning how to play FIFA with my husband. And by doing this, I have failed multiple times. In fact, there was a period where I was only failing. Of course, sometimes I would draw, but you know, it was mostly failure than draws. But recently, weeks and weeks later, I played with a couple of friends, beat a couple of friends, and then played with some people who were seemingly really good, and they couldn't even concede that many goals, you know, ending up with things like 5-3, 4-3, 2-1, you know, where they just had one goal ahead of me or even 2 goals ahead of me. And for me, that was progress. I was like, what? You know, this is growth. I am better. And when they're done playing, even if they won, they don't even have this like defeat, victory, winning joy kind of thing. They're like, oh my God, that was hard. You were difficult to beat. I did not know that every single time I was failing in the past, I was building resilience and I was getting better. I was getting more skilled. I was able to identify the things that I wasn't that great at and things that I could change. I was able to identify ideas that I could pivot, ideas that I could twist into something else, reinvent and make better, right? Identify weaknesses that I could improve on or strengths that I could use to cover up my weaknesses. I was able to know, should I attack more? Should I have a different formation? Who should I use? What players can I trust? Things like that. I have gotten more and more skilled. And guess what? Recently, I played my husband again. I won, he won, we drew. I've gotten so much better. So next time you feel, oh my God, I'm failing, remember, in the next couple of years, it's not even going to look like you failed, because again, you've made so much progress, and you look back and it would all make sense, right? Remember, prioritize progress over perfection, and the goal of an experiment is not to be right, but to discover, and that's going to change how you see failure. I hope this helps you as you learn from your failures, and I hope you remember one of the 4 stories that I've shared with you. I feel like I shared more than 4 stories, but you remember one of the stories that I've shared with you. You remember some of the words that I've shared with you, and it changes your perception about how you view failure and ultimately how you become the ultimate winner. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate, and have a lovely event. Bye.